This is Douglas Edwards, bringing you Retrospect, a film excursion into past events, events which form patterns by which we live today.
Retrospect is brought to you by the Office of Civil and Defense Mobilization in cooperation with your local Civil Defense Office and your local station. And now here's your host, Douglas Edwards.
In 1914, mankind braced itself for the great and inevitable World War. Here in America, while we watched the European nations mobilize, we announced an intention to remain neutral. 3 years later, we abandoned our position and joined the Allies in Europe. When it was over, we believed it had been the war that would end wars, that its only permanent result could be peace on earth. But a new and cataclysmic force would spring from the Great War to exert a profound influence on the course of history. Only now, only in retrospect, can we see that the most important, the most electrifying result of World War I was the Russian Revolution. Down through the centuries, the Russian people had been suppressed and exploited by a ruthless aristocracy. Tsar Nicholas II, last of the Russian emperors, the father of his people, the source under divine gift of all power. Nicholas had shown a tendency toward benevolence, but the inner circle of nobility, ever distrustful of the masses, guided him along more traditional lines. After scoring a number of victories early in the war, the morale of the Russia's great army gradually broke down. Strategy was poorly planned and executed. Corruption flourished among the officers, and a pitiful shortage of food and supplies exposed the malnutrition of Russia's economy. Within the nation, an old story, the inefficiency of the Tsarist regime, the discontent of the masses, poverty and hunger from Petrograd to the Bering Sea. The bonds of patriotism which had held the Tsar and his people together had become frayed and weak. In March 1917, Tsar Nicholas abdicated. But the provisional government formed by Alexander Kerensky was unable to cope with the internal disorder which followed. When riots broke out in Petrograd, an extreme radical element, the Bolsheviks, moved in swiftly. In one rousing speech after another, Nikolai Lenin, son of a schoolmaster, leader of the Bolshevik movement, pounded at the same theme, the discontent of Russia's common people. Lenin told the army and the peasants that power was theirs to take. He promised land for Russia's millions, a new machinery of government, a people's government for the oppressed masses. Long live the revolution of the workers, soldiers, and peasants, Lenin cried. Thus began the class struggle of the proletariat. Co-architect of the uprising was Leon Trotsky. A number of factions within Russia were ready to oppose the Bolshevik reign of terror. In March 1918, Trotsky made a separate peace with Germany. He could then turn his full attention to putting down the internal opposition and consolidating the revolution. This he accomplished by organizing a fighting force of 5 million men. By 1920, the Red Army had wiped out all resistance to the Bolsheviks. Lenin died suddenly in 1924. A struggle followed between Trotsky, who favored the spread of international communism, and Joseph Stalin, General Party Secretary, who wanted swifter socialization. 3 years later, the struggle ended with Trotsky's fall from power and eventual escape to Mexico. With the stability of the government still a question mark, 1927 saw the emergence of Russia's strong man. Joseph Stalin went on to fortify his one-man rule and build a military dictatorship. Opponents of Stalinism were done away with in the purges of the late 30s. Trotsky, still the most persuasive voice among the opposition, was assassinated in 1939. After World War II, Stalin launched a full-scale political offensive against the non-communist world, an offensive made more frightening in 1949 when the world learned that Russia had the atomic bomb. Stalin's death in 1953 set off a new struggle for power. While Malenkov and Bulganin took turns being premier, the game of political chess continued in the background. From out of the struggle came a new leader, a chubby little man who seemed unsuited to be a dictator, who startled the world with a 7-hour speech denouncing Joseph Stalin. But those who might have believed Nikita Khrushchev represented a new era of hope were jarred back to reality in 1956 during the Hungarian Revolution. It is not enough to hope for a new era of enlightened Soviet leadership. So long as the Cold War continues, we must all realize our individual responsibility for survival. Each of us has a role in the defense of our country. Each must learn what his role is and how to fulfill his individual responsibility. The Office of Civil and Defense Mobilization urges each of you to listen to the facts on civil defense, then prepare your home and family. Who is responsible for civil defense? The military, our government, or the individual citizen? Our guest today is Mr. Louis E. Berry, Assistant Director for Plans and Operations in the Office of Civil and Defense Mobilization. Mr. Berry, will you answer that question for us?
Mr. Edwards, everyone is responsible for civil defense. Governments, industries, and people. The times have forced this upon us. Tremendous weapons of destruction have been built. New delivery systems have been perfected that could carry these weapons to our very doors for the first time.
In other words, because everyone would be a possible target in another war, everyone must be prepared. Now, you mentioned government's responsibility. Could you explain that further? Where is the line exactly separating the government's job from the individual's?
Responsibility for civil defense rests squarely on regularly constituted governments, federal, state, and local, and on the people. President Eisenhower said, and I'd like to quote him exactly, "Nuclear war would place on all of us a great responsibility for action and sacrifice. Americans have the right to expect their governments to carry out their role in our total defense and to do those things beyond the capability of individuals."
What is the government doing to meet its responsibilities, Mr. Berry?
First, let me mention briefly our national plan, signed by President Eisenhower. This plan outlines the various responsibilities and actions of the federal government, states, local governments, industries, and also individuals. The plan was drawn up so that everyone, especially in government, would have a clear, concise idea of the job before him. Now, what are we in the federal government doing about it? Well, time is too short to go into all of the things we're doing, but let me cite some examples. Now, we have developed a national warning system capable of alerting nearly 400 warning points throughout the country within 15 seconds. We've stockpiled over $200 million worth of engineering and medical supplies. We've distributed nearly 2,000 emergency hospitals to important locations around the country. And each hospital is a self-contained medical unit with 200 beds. The federal government is giving guidance and example in building fallout shelters. Now, we hope eventually to have fallout protection in all suitable federal buildings. Sample shelters are being built throughout the nation to stimulate interest in the fallout shelter program. At least 3 prototype shelters are being built in every state. We're working with the states to develop continuity of government legislation. Now, this is designed to see that legal government survives and continues to operate following an attack. We have an intensive education program. We use every possible means to get survival facts to the American people. We have an information and an action program designed especially for the farmer and another for the women of the country. We're training over 2 million students in our high schools and colleges throughout the country each year in the use of radiological monitoring instruments.
Well, what about the states and cities, Mr. Berry? Are they set up to assume their extra civil defense responsibilities?
Yes, the states and local governments are responsible for civil defense in their respective areas. There are various agencies such as police, health, welfare, highway departments, have civil defense as a part of their daily jobs. And all of these services are coordinated by the civil defense directors.
Then their emergency job is much the same as their regular job, simply it's bigger.
Right, but our nation is not fully prepared until each family is prepared. The responsibility for an effective civil defense must be shared by the individual because only he can prepare his home and his family.
Thank you for being our guest today, Mr. Berry. It's actually good to know government has already accomplished so much in emergency actions for civilian protection. Now, it's up now to us to prepare our homes and families. In Chicago on Thanksgiving Day, 1895, the first competitive road race was held in the United States. The winner of that race covered the road distance of 54½ miles at the world-shaking average of 7½ miles an hour. It wasn't long before high-speed racing was all the rage. Over the years, as a test of engine and chassis durability under severe conditions and strain, racing vehicles have proved to be invaluable to the automotive industry. In the early 30s, Frank Lockhart, an Indianapolis Speedway winner, was one of the many racers who were still trying unsuccessfully to crack 300 miles an hour. Like all those before him, he did not succeed. Near the end of his run, his car went out of control, but miraculously, Lockhart walked away from the crash. The greatest of all speed demons was Sir Malcolm Campbell, who raced both in automobiles and boats. Campbell spent a fortune to establish himself as the world's fastest man. His vehicles were all especially designed and constructed, and all bore the same name, Bluebird. Shown here at Daytona Beach in 1932 doing 253 miles per hour, Campbell became the first to break the 300-mile barrier 3 years later. But Campbell was not destined to be the world's fastest man for long. That distinction went to another Englishman, John Cobb of London, who became the first person to travel more than 400 miles an hour on land. Cobb turned the trick on September 16, 1947, at the Bonneville, Utah Salt Flats, achieving a speed of over 403 miles an hour. In the realm of motorboat racing, most of the records are held by the great auto racers. 5 years after his accomplishment in Utah, John Cobb drove a jet-propelled hydroplane, the Crusader, to a new speed record on water, traveling over 206 miles an hour for 1 measured mile. But the event ended in tragedy. After completing the first run, Cobb's boat mysteriously dove to the side and disintegrated. By July 1955, the fastest speed ever attained in a hydroplane was just over 216 miles an hour. The name of the boat, Bluebird, driven by Donald Campbell, son of Sir Malcolm. 4 months later, Campbell broke his own record by traveling over 225 miles an hour on Lake Coniston, England. Man's constant desire to travel faster is subject to much analysis, but it would seem that the evolution of speed is ever present in the evolution of man. In reviewing the past, as we've done today, we often find courage and strength. Men lose their freedom through weakness. Let's make sure this doesn't happen to us. Responsibility for civil defense reaches from federal government down to every individual American. Today we've learned part of what our government is doing to keep this nation prepared. Your responsibility is to prepare your home and family against disaster. For information on what you can do to survive enemy attack, call your local civil defense office or write to OCDM, Battle Creek, Michigan. Remember, the strength of the family builds the strength of the nation. Do your part. We hope you've enjoyed this glimpse into the past and that you'll be on hand next time we bring you Retrospect. This is Douglas Edwards saying goodbye for now.
Retrospect, starring Douglas Edwards, was brought to you by the Office of Civil and Defense Mobilization in cooperation with your local Civil Defense Office and your local station. Survival in the nuclear age is a personal responsibility, touching every American family. Make sure you take part. Learn the facts about civil defense preparedness. Start your home preparedness program today. The prepared family builds a prepared nation. Civil defense is an American tradition.